Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kelly O'Donnell at the start of a very big week in politics, with Election Day tomorrow for major races coast to coast, as the government shutdown is poised to become the longest in U.S. history. All of it as our brand new NBC News poll reveals how Americans are reacting to this unprecedented moment and which political leaders are shouldering the blame. But first, some temporary relief is on the way for tens of millions of Americans whose SNAP benefits expired this weekend because of the government shutdown. Today, the Trump administration announcing that in order to comply with an emergency court ruling, it will use all of the money in the program's contingency fund to partially fund the Critical Nutrition Assistance Program for the month. But the fate of the program and the 42 million Americans who rely on it, that remains an enormous wild card, with no clear path to reopen the government and with both parties continuing to trade blame. Democrats refusing to budge on their demands to extend subsidies for the Affordable Care Act, with open enrollment officially underway and premium sticker shock setting in.
Are Democrats prepared to keep the government closed through Thanksgiving if it comes to that?
The question is, why are Republicans continuing to keep the government shut down? They have the House, the Senate, and the presidency. Donald Trump just made clear over the weekend repeatedly that Republicans have the ability to reopen this government. They don't want to do it because they'd rather continue to gut the health care of the American people.
President Trump saying that talks about health care have to come after Democrats agree to reopen the government. But he notably struggled to articulate any proposed reforms to the ACA during a 60 Minutes interview last night.
It's bad health care at far too high a price. We should fix that. We should fix it. And we can fix it with the Democrats. All they have to do is let the country open and we'll fix it.
You're saying your plan is to tell the Democrats to vote to end the shutdown.
Correct. Very simple.
And that you will put forward a health care plan?
No, we will work on fixing the bad health care that we have. Right now, we have terrible health care at too expensive for the people. Not for the government, for the people.
But, Mr. President, with all due respect, you've been talking about fixing the health care insurance plan since 2015.
And you can't do it because of the Democrats. I'm not going to do it by being extorted by the Democrats who have lost their way.
Sounds like it's not going to get solved, the shutdown.
It's going to get solved, yeah. Oh, it's going to get solved.
How?
We'll get it solved. Eventually, they're going to have to vote.
You're saying the Democrats will capitulate?
I think they have to. And if they don't vote, that's their problem.
For their part, our new NBC News poll shows most voters blame President Trump and Republicans for the shutdown, 52% compared to the 42% who say they blame Democrats. That's even, let me try that again. Even as 37% of the registered voters say they have a positive view of the Republican Party, so that gives you a sense. More of them are upset about this, even though they may have good feelings about the Republican Party. Now, while that is not great, it is still nearly 10 points higher than those who say they have a positive view of Democrats. Meanwhile, the president's job approval rating, in our new poll, sits at 43%. That is a 4-point drop since March, as voters increasingly say he's fallen short on delivering on his promises for key issues. And joining me to break all of this down is our team of NBC News reporters. We've got Gabe Gutierrez at the White House. Gary Grumbach is with me on set with the latest on the legal fight over SNAP benefits. Ryan Nobles is at a Northern Virginia food bank ahead of a key governor's race there tomorrow. And Shaquille Brewster spoke to voters in a swing state, Wisconsin, about how they're feeling right now. And Brian Chung, filling out our group, he's at the big board with more on the economic ripple effect of it all. So, Gabe, let me begin with you at the White House, where there is a drop in the president's approval rating. We know how closely the president follows numbers like that. What are the issues where voters feel that President Trump has somehow fallen short? And are you hearing any reaction yet from the White House?
Well, Kelly, look, there's a lot of fast-moving developments here, as there often are in this White House. The president coming off that overseas trip last week, touting a variety of what he views as foreign policy accomplishments. But you're right. Over the weekend, we got those new poll numbers right there with his approval rating at just 43%. Now, voters also saying, or 2/3 of them saying, that the president has fallen short on the economy and the cost of living. The majority say that he's fallen short of changing business as usual in D.C. Also, the majority believe that he's done more to undermine the Constitution rather than defend the Constitution. Now, certainly the White House brushing off these poll numbers. They view what they have done, as you heard the president say during his 60 Minutes interview, very confident in what he's done for the economy, even though he says that prices have fallen. We have seen inflation tick up a bit. But at this point, the White House is brushing off any of those concerns. Perhaps things could change with these elections tomorrow that are coming up, and perhaps whether that voters deliver some message there. But at this point, the White House continues to stress that it believes it's on the right course. Kelly.
And so, Gabe, I don't hear in your response there a sense that these numbers, which are problematic in certain respects for the president, are a point of pressure to move him to try to do more to end the shutdown. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yes, Kelly. And look, you heard in that part of what you played from the 60 Minutes interview, the president believes so far that it is Democrats who need to capitulate here, and that they will blink first. And that's what you also hear from speaking with White House officials. Now, they've tried to brand this shutdown in different ways over the past several weeks, calling it the Schumer shutdown, not doing that quite so much anymore, but still putting the onus on the Democrats to come forward and end this shutdown, even though we are starting to see those poll numbers showing that voters do blame Republicans for the shutdown, Kelly.
And Gary, I want to bring you in on this, and we do see a pressure point, and it's the courts. When you've been doing reporting today on what happened to bring about a change from the administration when it comes to SNAP benefits, at least in part. Tell us about what the courts are saying and how they're complying. So the Trump administration is fulfilling the court's order today, but it's not fulfilling what the 42 million Americans on SNAP benefits really need, which is a full amount in their wallet, in their paycheck here. We're talking about $180 per individual. That's what they usually get. Because it's going to be split in half now for 42 million Americans, we're talking about $90 per person. That is supposed to go for 30 days for these individuals. So you talk about the significance of that on the everyday American. So the Trump administration is using $4.65 billion of their contingency fund, but they're saying that's it. We're not going to be able to spend another dollar for November because they say they don't have that money to spend. If there's other funds that are available, as the judge wanted to use them to spend, they say they're not going to do that. Do you get a sense that there is a time lag? The court said this must be done. The administration says they will comply to a point, a partial payment. Do we expect that that money will get to people anytime soon? Well, it does take some time, right? There was people that needed dinner last night. That was not in their SNAP benefits package. That was not there. People need dinner tonight, right? That's the kind of thing that this does not happen very quickly. Usually the administration, the government has all month to refill for the next month. This is the kind of thing where they're now scrambling to get this done in the coming days. And I also want to ask you about what we're hearing in response to how the White House is viewing. Are they caving on this issue? Let me go back to Gabe on this. Do you sense that this is something where the White House simply felt compelled to respond because the court said so, or do you see movement on the issue itself?
Well, Kelly, you as much as anyone would certainly know that the White House would never use the words that they're caving on any issue. So true, my friend, so true. But in this case, look, the White House repeatedly says that they will comply with any court order, and this is in that vein. Now, I think it's interesting, Kelly, what the president is doing today. We are not seeing him on camera, but he is taking part in these two tele-rallies for Republican candidates in New Jersey and Virginia. Certainly very high priority for the White House to do what they can to see Republican candidates do well in those essentially local elections. So it could be that Republicans and the administration specifically wanting to see politically how this plays out tomorrow. But in terms of that short-term funding for those SNAP benefits, that is something that could be seen as kicking the can down the road. It could also be seen as trying to remove, at least in the very short term, one of those pressure points that could have been a huge deciding factor for Republicans. You notice just before that, the administration had also tried to pay those military benefits, at least part of them as well, trying to make this as least painful as possible in the short term. But again, whether they're caving, now they will not say that they're definitely caving on this issue, Kelly. We can certainly agree on that. They would not be using that language. But thank you for your analysis there, Gabe, from the White House, and Gary here in the studio with us. I want to bring in Ryan now. And as we've been saying, our poll found that 34% of voters say they themselves see their families
having been affected by this shutdown. Now, you're in Virginia, which has one of the highest shares of federal workers in the country, and we know they have been hit hard by the shutdown, many of them furloughed. So what are you hearing on the ground?
Kelly, I think there's no doubt that this part of the country, Northern Virginia in particular, has been enormously hit hard by the government shutdown. And to be here all day at a food bank like this, you really start to see the impacts at an acute level. Some of these shelves that you can see up here behind me, normally they would be filled in preparation for the holiday rush that comes at a food bank like this. They're already seeing a depleted amount of resources because of the cuts that were handed down to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. That was long before the government shutdown took place. Then they were dealt with the need that arose from federal government workers being furloughed and working without pay, many of them ending up in food banks like this for the first time. And now they are also dealing with the uncertainty around SNAP benefits. We talked to some of the patrons of this food bank today and got a real sense about how they're just sick and tired of the uncertainty that's connected to all the upheaval in Washington. Take a listen.
I do come here every so often, and I'm running extra low on food, and then I come here, and it's always been a blessing to my family. Even though I'm not a government worker, I still pay attention because, like I said, it affects everybody. It doesn't just affect a certain group of people, it affects everybody.
I just want this to be over. I want them to just agree on something or stop going back and forth because, I mean, at the end of the day, everybody's already proved their point.
And so when we look ahead to what's going to happen here tomorrow in Virginia, which is a gubernatorial election, it's really the first opportunity that voters have to weigh in directly on what's happening with the shutdown. And that message could be sent louder here in Virginia than any other state because of the volume of federal government workers and people connected to the federal government that have been impacted by this shutdown. The Democratic candidate in the race, Abigail Spanberger, has made the government shutdown a central focus of her campaign, the economy in general. She's accused her opponent, Winsome Sears-Earle, of not doing enough to address and push back on the Trump administration's decision. Right now, Democrats look in a very strong position to be successful here tomorrow. And, Kelly, it seems that the government shutdown will play at least part of a role in what happens here in Virginia on Election Day.
And thank you for being there to track that for us and bringing us some of that human impact as well, Ryan. Thank you so much. I now turn to Shaq, and I know that, Shaq, you were talking to voters in a key swing state. We always seem to get together like this during election seasons. And what are you hearing, not here in the D.C. area, where there's obviously a big impact about the shutdown, but out in the country? What are voters telling you about the shutdown and how they feel the two parties have handled it?
Yeah, if it's November, it's likely that I have been or am going to the state of Wisconsin to talk to voters there. Kelly, I think one theme that I heard that somewhat surprised me when I was talking to voters and in my conversations is that even when you push them to assign blame on one side or the other and explain who is responsible for the shutdown, there's this big feeling of everyone's responsible. Everyone has their hands dirty in this. I want you to listen to some of those conversations in Wisconsin.
Well, I'm going to blame the Democrats. Let's come to a solution. I mean, good, bad, or indifferent. Let's figure something out. This is getting too long.
How can you blame one side or the other? You need to meet in the middle and have compromise on both sides. That's the only way you're going to fix things. You need to compromise.
I think that Democrats are passive, and I think that Republicans are predatory. I think the whole system is a mess, and I think that both sides are to blame.
I think something else you hear in there, something you alluded to at the beginning of this segment, the negative views of the Democratic Party. In Wisconsin, you have 57% of voters saying they have a negative view of the Democratic Party. I spoke to the new Wisconsin Democratic chair, 33 years old. I asked him about that specific number. Listen to what he told me about what they're doing to address this.
I think that not everyone has seen the fight that they wanted out of the Democratic Party until recently. I think that taking a stand and fighting to make sure that people can get the health care they need at affordable prices is a tremendous stand for the Democratic Party.
I think what you hear in there is what's happening in Washington, D.C., with Democrats not providing the votes for that extension of funding because they want to have a negotiation over health care prices. That is being backed up by Democrats in some of these swing states. One other interesting thing is that in addition to these canvass events and door knocking that's already taking place in the state of Wisconsin, even though they don't have an election tomorrow, they're also pairing food drives with that. It's a signal that they believe they want to show it's not just about policy, but they have ideas and fresh ways to help voters who need it the most.
Shaq, we always learn interesting things when you are out talking with voters and politically active folks. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. And now we're going to bring Brian into our conversation. We are narrowing in on the longest shutdown in U.S. history. That happens Wednesday. And so what are the long and short-term impacts on the economy? So, Brian, I know you can give us a sense of how this has a real impact much broader than just this D.C. area.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have to add a little bit of historical context to this. If we look back to the 2018-2019 government shutdown, which is the current record at 35 days in terms of the longest one in history, there was $3 billion of permanent economic loss, according to the Congressional Budget Office. In fact, it was estimated that there were even steeper losses, but when the government reopened, they were able to recuperate a lot of that. But again, that $3 billion number is what was estimated to have been permanently lost, in part because of the over 375,000 people specifically that were furloughed in that particular government shutdown. You can imagine the strain it put on all those families, as we've already been talking about, to not have paychecks clearing for a whole month, which is the reason why, if you talk about this government shutdown lasting longer than that, and also when you factor in the fact that this is a full government shutdown as opposed to a partial one, the economic impact is estimated to be even larger, $7 to $14 billion, according to the same group, the Congressional Budget Office. And again, big reason for that is because of the scale of this government shutdown, but also because of the potential for more government workers to be impacted by this particular one, especially with a lot of those reduction in force notices going out, which permanently laid people off. These are all things that we're watching for in terms of the historical context, given that, yes, $7 to $14 billion, it's only a drop in the bucket for a multi-trillion-dollar economy, but we're talking about permanent losses here, Kelly.
And part of what's not happening is the normal reporting process. We've missed one jobs report during the shutdown so far, and I imagine that adds more uncertainty if people don't have the data they need.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you'll notice that another thing that I had as a bullet point on here is we got one jobs report missed. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics usually gives us a monthly check-in on how many jobs are added in a given month. We didn't have that picture for the month of September. It was supposed to be published the first week of October. The government was shut down. We didn't get that. And this number is going to turn into 2 if the government shutdown lasts through the end of next week, because we're expecting another jobs report at that point in time. So we don't even know how many federal workers have been impacted, let alone how many at an aggregate level, except for these statistics. These are unemployment insurance claims that we've gotten at state levels in the aggregate. You can see just how much the federal worker jobless claims have risen since the shutdown began in October. It was only in the hundreds prior to the government shutdown beginning. You could see, as of the last filing last week, over 8,000 government workers filing for unemployment insurance. This is a big deal and underscores all the impact that we've been talking about earlier in this show. Kelly?
Human consequences. Brian, thank you so much. And we also have a big programming note for you. We'll have a special Election Day edition of Meet the Press Now tomorrow. And then make sure to tune in for the special election night coverage starting at 7 p.m. Eastern with live results and analysis as the votes come in. And coming up, Steve Kornacki is at the big board breaking down more of the big takeaways from NBC's brand new poll and what it means for the future of American politics. Plus, NBC News speaks to Republican gubernatorial nominee Jack Ciattarelli on the trail in New Jersey, where he's locked in a tight race in one of tomorrow night's marquee matchups. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We are now just hours from Election Day with races that will give us new information about Americans' views of the president and both parties 1 year after Donald Trump's election and 1 year before the midterms, a critical time. In Virginia, Democrat Abigail Spanberger is seeking to flip the governor's mansion back to blue in her race against Republican Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears, while in New Jersey's gubernatorial election, Democrat Mikey Sherrill is looking to hold off a challenge from the Republican Jack Ciattarelli. Now, former President Obama, he was out on the trail, and he was appearing this weekend for both Spanberger and Sherrill and trying to tie Ciattarelli to President Trump.
Her opponent, not so much. Mikey's opponent has now run for governor 3 times in a row. I mean, I believe in persistence, but at a certain point. So 3 times in a row. Other 2 times he lost. So this time his strategy is to suck up to the Republicans in Washington.
Meanwhile, Zoran Mamdani, the 34-year-old Democratic socialist, is seeking to become New York City's next mayor. Mamdani has become a lightning rod among Republicans, and the House's top Democrat, Hakeem Jeffries, is pushing back on the idea that he is the future of the Democratic Party.
Do you see Mamdani as the future of the Democratic Party?
No, I think the future of the Democratic Party is going to fall, as far as we're concerned, relative to the House Democratic Caucus and members who are doing a great work all across the country as it relates to our need to both take back control of the House, but in doing so, make sure that we're communicating to the American people like we understand you deserve better than the country that you have received.
And over the weekend, President Trump falsely describing Mamdani as communist and threatening to withhold funding for New York City if he wins tomorrow. Joining me now from New Jersey is NBC News correspondent Julie Sirkin and NBC News chief data analyst Steve Kornacki, who joins me from the big board with even more from our new NBC News poll. Let me start with you, Julie. Democrats are trying to tie Ciattarelli to the Republican, he is the Republican in New Jersey, to President Trump. And what is the response? What are you seeing?
Well, Ciattarelli is not really looking to be tied to Trump in that way, though he did embrace him, and of course Trump endorsed him. He's holding a tele-rally for him tonight. Ciattarelli knows that this is a blue state with a blue state government, and he needs to make sure that he still attracts independents and, yes, even some Democrats, which is exactly where he was here in a Democratic town, a Latino town, Dover, New Jersey, a couple of months ago, the day after he won the primary. I met him here. I spoke to him here. I went back and I visited some of the voters. Again, they are extremely split. Many of them voted for President Trump. Many of them who voted for President Trump telling me that because of the immigration ICE raids, the deportations, they've soured on their support for him. Still, a healthy amount looking to support Ciattarelli tomorrow. Here's a little bit of our conversation and exchange this morning.
What do you credit with your tightening margins with Mikey Sherrill? Is it the president? Is it his backing? His approval ratings are not great.
It's the positive energy that's been demonstrated by this campaign from day one. We get up and down the state, we shake hands, we look people in the eye, we tell them how we're going to solve their problems. That's what wins elections.
What about the economy, sir? The ratings nationwide, the president's handling of it are not as high. That was his biggest issue.
You keep asking me about national issues. This is about New Jersey.
It's reflecting in New Jersey.
It's all about property. It's all about property taxes. It's all about monthly electricity bills. It's about public safety, public education. Development. Those are New Jersey issues that my opponent wants to blame on the president. He's got nothing to do with any of those things.
So clearly trying to put some daylight, Kelly, between him and the president. I bring up this town that I'm in Passaic County for a reason. I'm sure Steve Kornacki is going to talk about it more, because back in 2020, President Biden beat Donald Trump in this county, again, primarily Latinos, especially in this town, by 35,000 votes, more than that. In 2024, Kamala Harris beat Donald Trump by 5,000 votes. So that is why they're paying so much attention to this area, Kelly.
And Julie, I love when you have a really Jersey moment with the Jersey Paul. That was great. That really told us what it's like to be on the ground. So thank you for your work in the field. And Steve, tell us, what does the big board indicate about tomorrow and Election Day? You've got new data for us. Break it all down.
Yeah, Kelly, these are some pretty tough numbers in our new NBC News poll for the president and for his party on the eve of these off-year elections in New Jersey and Virginia. This is our generic ballot question. We ask this all the time. Which party do you want to see control Congress? This is with an eye to next year's midterm elections. But check this out. We have the Democrats with an 8-point advantage here on the generic ballot over Republicans. For some comparison, we checked in earlier this year in the spring, and this was essentially dead even. It was +1 for the Democrats then. It is +8 for the Democrats now. So again, this poll showing Trump's approval rating falling to 43% and showing Democrats opening up a lead on the generic ballot. Also seeing a bit of an enthusiasm difference between the parties. This is measuring who has the highest level of interest in the midterm elections. I mean, this number, 66% overall, that's extremely high. We're still a year away from the midterms. You would normally see this number like a week before the midterms. We're seeing it a year out, but you can see there is a bit of a disparity. It's about 3/4 of Democrats, only about 2/3 of Republicans with that highest level of interest. So again, could be driving some of the Democratic advantage in that generic ballot. Also could be a factor in those elections tomorrow in Virginia and in New Jersey. Also, there's the Republicans, this is sort of their hope, the hope they draw from our poll. It's that the Democratic Party has an image problem. You can see here, positive 28% about the Democratic Party as a whole, negative almost twice that. An outright majority, 53% of voters with a negative view of the Democratic Party. Now, the Republicans, by contrast, they're not popular, they're just less unpopular. So an advantage for the Republicans there. And then we asked about the economy. The Republicans, which party would do better on it? The Republicans with a 1-point advantage. But the news here is that's way down. For the last several years, Republicans have had a decided, generally double-digit advantage on this question. In the last few months, that has basically moved into a wash between the two parties. Again, Trump getting low marks, particularly for how he handles the economy. And then we basically asked, what do you want your vote to mean? Do you want it to be a sign of support for the president, opposition, or not really either one of them? And again, you can see there's more energy on that opposition side. So we've seen the opposition party, Kelly, tend to do well in the past in these off-year elections like we're going to see tomorrow, tend to do well in the midterm elections. The polling data we have here from our new readout is in line with that. So be very interesting to see those results tomorrow in light of what this poll is telling us today.
Well, it's certainly getting me interested in what happens tomorrow, because when you talked about that enthusiasm level in the midterms a year away, when so many of us think of a lot of the public being a bit weary of politics, and yet the numbers reveal there is some real interest in being able to use your voice as a voter. Is that what you're taking away from this?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'm looking at tomorrow, beyond obviously who wins and loses, is what is the turnout level in these elections in New Jersey, in Virginia, also in New York City, by the way, where we're getting some look at the early voting data in the mayor's race there, showing, potentially record-shattering overall turnout there as well. So, yeah, that level of interest, are we just seeing it in the number of people who vote, whoever they're voting for?
Well, you're always our main event on election days. So rest up, be ready for tomorrow. Don't know if it'll be an early night or a late one, but we'll be looking for all of your analysis as the data comes in. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Kelly.
And up next, an NBC News exclusive with Illinois Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker on the historic government shutdown and the strain states like his are facing as they rush to bolster SNAP benefits as the D.C. funding fight drags on. We'll have all of that coming up. You're watching Meet the Press Now. And welcome back. The government shutdown is forcing governors to scramble to provide some of the services their residents typically receive from the federal government. In an exclusive interview this afternoon with NBC News, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker outlined the measures he is taking to help keep residents who rely on SNAP food benefits. And after the federal government has not been able to work that out, he said he would look for ways to use contingency funds to partially pay those benefits.
The $20 million that you set aside to help fund food banks statewide, do you know what happens with that now that it's half funded? Does that get added to the pot, so to speak? Or what can Illinoisans know, those who receive these benefits, about how much will be there for them this month?
SNAP is a 100% federally funded program. And so we're talking $90 million a week for Illinois. is what normally would be provided
I was
for
going to ask you,
SNAP.
how big of a Band-Aid is that?
$20 million isn't enough. It just isn't. And we don't have enough money. $360 million in a month. We don't have an extra $360 million. We're going to do everything that we can, though. And remember, the distribution points are very important, and those are the pantries. And they do such great work already. So what we're going to try to do is fund them to make sure that they've got enough money to provide mostly dry goods. They won't be able to do the slightly more expensive fresh goods that they often are distributing. But at least we're going to keep people fed for as long as we possibly can. And look, if we run out, we'll have to obviously come back and figure out where we're going to find more money to support, because we can't let people starve. I mean, we have too many people in this state. 1.9 million people are getting SNAP benefits in a state of 13 million people. And we can't let them starve.
And NBC's Maggie Vespa joins me now. I know you just stepped away from that interview, and our viewers certainly know that Governor Pritzker has been one of the president's most outspoken critics, and certainly a very prominent Democratic voice doing that. Does he believe that Republicans in general will pay a price for the president's policies? Is that what he's arguing to you in your conversation?
Kelly, he actually does, and for a couple of reasons. Number one are some of the numbers that we talked about, that Steve just talked about in our new NBC News poll, that show more Americans blame Republicans in Congress and blame President Trump for the ongoing government shutdown than blame Democrats. It's 52% according to our poll to 42%. So that's reason number one. Reason number two are conversations like he's having at the event that you saw here today. You saw a video of it earlier. We are at the Mother's Milk Bank of the Western Great Lakes, just outside Chicago. They got a state grant earlier this year, and that's why the governor was here today, just basically talking to recipients of that grant about the work they're doing here. And he says that more and more events like this, particularly in rural, and as he put it, ruby red parts of Illinois, he's having conversations with people who tell him, he says, that they voted for President Trump. They voted for Republicans in 2024, and that vote isn't yielding the results they thought it would. Here's more of our exclusive interview to that point. Take a listen.
It isn't that those people are standing up and saying, I made a big mistake. Nobody wants to say that, of course. But they are saying to themselves, what are they doing in Washington? The Republicans are in charge, and I voted for them. What are they doing? And wondering how this is going to change. And when we say back to them, well, the Republicans have to make the decision to finally remove the tariffs so you can sell your soybeans, for example, or that they need to restore health care so that you finally will have back the health care that your family deserves. I think people are listening to that and thinking they're going to vote differently this time than they did last time.
You're having those real-life conversations with people.
Real-life conversations. People are understanding who is in charge in Washington that is now burdening them, and it's the very people that they voted for.
And the governor went on to tell me, Kelly, that he expects the issue of these SNAP benefits almost lapsing and now being half funded for the next month will really resonate in those areas, because rural parts of the state have great food insecurity. They don't have a lot of food banks to kind of bridge that gap while this goes on. So he expects to have more, he told me, conversations just like that.
Maggie, thank you so much for bringing us your interview and the work I know it took to get that to happen today. So thanks very much for bringing us the latest. And after the break, pushing the Pentagon. President Trump threatens to take military action in Nigeria and weighs putting troops on the ground in Mexico as the Army carries out new strikes in the Caribbean. Keep it here on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. President Trump is ramping up threats for potential U.S. military action around the world. Over the weekend, in a post on social media, he instructed the Pentagon to prepare for possible action in Nigeria, suggesting the U.S. will go in, quote, guns a-blazing, and accusing the country's government of not doing enough to protect Christians there. The announcement comes just days after the White House designated Nigeria a country of particular concern. That's a quote, a label given to countries responsible for severe violations of religious freedom. Now, this also comes as NBC News has learned the administration is also planning on sending U.S. troops into Mexico to target drug cartels. And that is according to U.S. officials familiar with this effort. And joining me now is NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube. And Courtney, you have been tracking so much military action in places we don't often hear about. And so in our conversations in the office, we have to know if we're talking about Venezuela or now we're talking about Nigeria. How surprised are you to see this suggestion by the president?
Nigeria was a shocking suggestion for a number of different reasons, right? There are problems in many of the countries around Nigeria right now, but that's not one that had been on the radar of a lot of military officials. And just to give you an example of that is the U.S. doesn't really have much of a presence there in that region anymore. There's some U.S. military presence in Chad. Of course, there's Ethiopia. There's sort of smatterings around there. But for the most part, the U.S. doesn't have anyone there. So the notion that the U.S. would be planning for missions into Nigeria is shocking.
Which requires all the staging and all the setup.
Exactly.
Which is why not being in the neighborhood is a problem.
Exactly.
Tell us more about Mexico. Obviously, far closer, a topic the president talks about a lot. He has been very vocal about trying to take action against cartels. Is that what this is about?
It is. So this would be, and I should say there's no imminent mission right now, but the officials who we spoke with said that the U.S. is now in the early planning stages for a mission that would involve active duty U.S. military, primarily from Joint Special Operations Command, so special operators, working with intelligence professionals, likely from the CIA. And this mission would be under what's known as Title 50. So that's it. That is an intelligence mission. So the command and control essentially would be under the intelligence community. But what's really striking about this is not just that they would be considering using drone strikes against cartel leaders, cartel locations, but that it could include these U.S. military and these CIA or intelligence professionals going across the border into Mexico to carry out these strikes. It would really be an expansion of what we've been talking about, it feels like every single day lately, and that is the Trump administration's military strikes against cartels, primarily emanating out of Venezuela.
And you describe it as being in a planning stage, but you get a sense that there is an intent to be ready to act, not just planning for the sake of planning?
Absolutely. So we've been reporting on this for several months, that the U.S. is considering the potential for strikes, but it's moved into this planning and ultimately into the training phase. So that's what, again, there's no final order for them to do this, but once the final order comes, once the training is done, that could come pretty quickly.
And when the intelligence community is in charge, does that mean we'd be less likely to hear the results of what they would carry out?
Not only the results, we may not even get confirmation that the U.S. is involved in things. So, theoretically, if they do start striking some of these cartel locations, the U.S. may never acknowledge that it was even them doing it.
It's so much on your plate, and thank you for being across it all around the world. Thank you, Courtney. And still to come, the Maine character. NBC News speaks exclusively with Democrat Graham Plattner about the controversy surrounding his Maine Senate campaign, which includes some offensive comments and a tattoo on his chest that has Nazi associations. That story is coming up next on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. And you might have heard us say tomorrow's Election Day, which puts us just about a year away from the 2026 midterm elections. But one key Senate battle is already heating up, and that is the Senate seat in Maine that's currently held by longtime Republican Senator Susan Collins. That will be a critical race for Democrats if they hope to pick up any seats in the upper chamber. Now, Graham Plattner, an oyster farmer and combat veteran, is hoping to challenge both Senator Collins and the Democratic Party establishment. But in recent weeks, he's faced an onslaught of damaging revelations, including past offensive comments on social media and a tattoo on his chest that resembles a Nazi symbol, which I understand he has since covered up. Now, my colleague Sahil Kapoor sat down with Graham Plattner and asked him how he's been able to keep his campaign viable.
You're still standing.
Yes.
Why is that the case, and how have you been able to transcend what other candidates would not have been able to?
One, I think because I just addressed it. We didn't run away from it. I'm very confident in my worldview. I'm very confident in my politics. But it took years and years of not being confident, of being confused, of being disillusioned, of being angry. It took all of that to get me where I am.
One of the arguments that the Mills team is making and will make is that she's won twice, that she's tested, that she's a safe bet, and that you haven't run for office before and that you would be too risky. How do you respond to that?
I think the risky candidate is the establishment candidate. I think my quote-unquote lack of experience is a positive. People don't want establishment politicians. People don't want to see the same playbook run over and over and over again. A playbook which, by the way, has failed to unseat Susan Collins time after time. I firmly believe risk is running an establishment candidate that is not trying something new.
NBC News senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor joins me now. And obviously, he is an interesting figure in politics of the moment and has a pulse on some things, but also a lot of baggage coming into your conversation. What other takeaways after you've spent a little time with him?
Yeah, a few things, Kelly. The first is Grant Plattner is leaning into the scandals around his offensive posts, using it as an argument to tell his own story as a veteran who went to combat, had a dark, disillusioned period where he started saying nasty things online on the internet, fighting with people. He is betting that the voters of Maine will see that evolution, will believe, when they come see him, that he's a better person now and that he's moved past that previous phase of his life. Second, he's leaning into electability, which is interesting. It's not the traditional politician move of, deflecting and pivoting to your strengths. This is the weakness for him because on paper, it's his opponent, Janet Mills, who is generally seen as the electable candidate, having won twice in Maine. He's making the case pretty vigorously that it's a bad idea to nominate an establishment candidate in a populist moment, recognizing that this is an argument that he has to make to voters and win. And finally, he is extending an olive branch to the DSCC, the Democratic campaign arm, even though they're backing Janet Mills, not taking that personally.
And certainly Governor Mills has been in politics there a long time. So has Susan Collins. He is a newer face, also a younger face, if there's any generational component to this. But do you get a sense that when you look at Governor Mills or you look at Senator Collins, both are very sort of proper politicians? They are not the type to have extensive controversies. And do you think that's part of why he's leaning into sort of owning his own bumps along the way?
Yeah, there's certainly a desire, Kelly, among many of the voters I spoke to for a different kind of candidate. Susan Collins has been around for nearly 3 decades now. Janet Mills is a known quantity, having served 2 terms as governor. Some of the voters I spoke to had, they really like Janet Mills. They voted for her twice. Some of them even voted for Susan Collins in the past. By the way, Grant Plattner told me years ago he voted for Susan Collins in the past, and many of them are undecided in this primary. The through line here is all of them are willing to at least give Grant Plattner a chance to explain himself before they disqualify him. Take a listen.
He apologizes for what he did, and he is different now, and I think that that's a noble quality in a politician.
It's something that I'm going to continue to pay attention to if there's any more things that come to light. But I genuinely don't think it's disqualifying because he hasn't been evasive, he hasn't been defensive.
If you look at the controversies surrounding the current president, this is nothing, in my opinion.
It gave me pause, but I read his responses, and I'm still intrigued to hear more about him.
And Kelly, that could be the crucial question in this vitally important Maine Senate race. Do the voters want another insider, or are they willing to take a chance on an outsider?
Really interesting, Sahil. Thank you so much. We're going to continue this with our panel. Joining me now is Jeff Mason, White House correspondent for Reuters, Chuck Rocha, Democratic strategist and host of the Substack show, The Rocha Revolution, and Sarah Matthews, former Trump deputy press secretary and spokesperson for the Home of the Brave, working for the president in the first term, not in the current term. So, Jeff, let me start with you. Wow. The apology tour is working for this new candidate on the scene, or at least making an impression on some of the voters that Sahil came across. Very different than what we normally have seen in Maine politics.
Absolutely.
Why do you think voters are open to at least giving him some time?
Well, one thing he was not wrong about, whether you're on his side or on his opponent's side, is that the previous playbook for Democrats has not worked. In a state where arguably they should be able to elect a Democratic senator, and they just haven't. They haven't been able to beat Susan Collins. So there's got to be some element of that. I think we've also seen in politics over the last several years that voters are do like to have somebody who they can have a beer with. Imagine having a beer with, that sort of congenial personality, relatable that comes out with him, and that seems to be helping him as well, despite some of the negatives.
And Chuck, Leader Schumer has already endorsed Governor Mills and I think was probably involved in her recruitment to run as a candidate. What do you think the presence of Plattner means in the race for her?
I think it shakes things up, and I think for everybody who thought that he doesn't have a chance and that this is disqualifying are the same people who said Donald Trump could never be elected president, and he's been elected twice. A lot of times, to your point, Jeff, is that we've been missing a lot of the Democratic base and what they really care about. We've been talking at them and not listening to them, and they're very aggravated. That's why you see the Democratic brand and the bottom right now. We need new faces, whether Graham's it or not. That's still yet to be determined. The primary is a long way away. And sure, Senator Chuck Schumer is going to be with the incumbent governor, 2 terms elected, proven quantity, because that's what incumbents do. And that may be a great strategy. We will see. This is going to play out over a longer period of time.
And do you get a sense that this is all about bucking the system? Is that part of it? That those who've been in office, there's always a bit of an anti-incumbent vibe. But this is kind of it's a new character.
I've been running campaigns for 36 years. I'm one of the few people on TV that run campaigns every day. And it's the biggest difference from when I ran Ann Richards' governor's election back in the 90s is folks are fed up. More people are registering as independents than Democrats or Republicans. They really feel this anxiety about cost of living right now. They want to blame one party or the other, and nobody's fixing their problems on either side.
Susan Collins has been in office for a long time. Sarah, you're a Republican here. She has been the type of Republican that focused on small business, that focused on trying to deliver for her state, and often being that critical vote on the national scene that was needed at times. What would your advice to her be when she's facing this kind of a challenge?
I think she plays it well, and the fact that she always is touting how bipartisan she is, how she's willing to work across the aisle, how she's willing to stand up to Trump. And does she do that every time that I would like her to? No. But she does stand up to him more than most Republican senators. And what I will say, too, is that when you're looking at the candidates that the Democrats are running, they're going to be tough to beat her with, because you look at someone like Janet Mills, she's 77 years old. I think that most voters are tired of these older Democratic candidates.
For a 6-year term. That's part of
exactly, and for a 6-year term. Mm-hmm. And I will point out, though, Susan Collins is also in her 70s. So if I'm a voter in Maine and I'm looking at those as my options, I'm not thrilled with that. So a Graham Plattner would be appealing, but then obviously you have the candidate quality issues of Reddit posts and the covering up of this Nazi tattoo. And also, I think that he has been out there touting that he is someone who can bring in those younger, male, disaffected voters. I think on a national scale that is something that the Democratic Party needs in their candidates. But in Maine, I think the politics are a little bit different. I think what you need to be looking at if you're the Democratic Party is how can we get those voters, the college-educated, older females who voted for Kamala Harris and Susan Collins in the last election.
And there's a boldness of independent thought in the Northeast that's not the same as every other state. Yeah. Jeff, when we look at redistricting, that has been catching fire around the country, where we never thought it would be a topic of the moment, but it is. And we've heard from Governor Newsom, and we've heard from DNC Chair Ken Martin on this issue. Let's listen to that for a moment, and then we'll talk about it.
But we're seeing overwhelming understanding and recognition of what's at stake. And remember, it's Prop 50, because this impacts everyone watching in all 50 states. As I said a moment ago, Donald Trump is an historic president, historically unpopular. He is not screwing around. He's changing the rules. He's rigging the game because he knows he'll lose if all things are equal. He did not expect California to fight fire with fire.
My hope is that after next Tuesday, when Prop 50 passes, that this will have a chilling effect on what Republicans do. They will see the handwriting on the wall, because here's the handwriting, which is if they're going to do this and continue doing this nonsense, which is unconstitutional and illegal, we're going to be forced to do it ourselves.
So do 2 unconstitutional acts make a right here? I mean, is that...
You know, in this case, I would say yes, because at the end of the day, what they're trying to do is steal the upcoming election.
So you cover the president every day. Do you get a sense that he might regret urging Governor Abbott in Texas to sort of kick off this redistricting move? He thought he could pick up a few seats there, that would give him a cushion, and now it's caught fire in other places, too.
I'm smiling, Kelly, because I don't think the word regret...
it's the second time I've done that today. I said cave earlier.
Did you?
Yes, I'm getting caught.
It's not a word that I associate with Donald Trump. I don't think he's going to regret it.
But does he see a connection, perhaps, between his actions there there and this catching fire?
Well, he'll have to. I mean, and I think to your broader question, certainly the Democrats are making a decision right now to, as was just said in one of those quotes, fight fire with fire. And that's not something they've always done, in part because Democrats have felt like we need to follow the rules. We need to sort of stay in the lane of norms that President Trump does not care about. And now they're seeing, look, if we do that, we're just going to lose election after election. So that may be something, whether it's regret or whether it's surprise or whether it's recalculation.
Maybe recalculation. That might be a word he would live with.
Yeah.
What do you think for Democrats when you heard the chairman talk about the unconstitutional nature of this and then still needing to go forward? How will Democrats handle that?
Well, there's one thing for sure, and Donald Trump got elected because he had the American people believing that the system was rigged against him. He used that a lot, which is ironically a lot of like Bernie Sanders and Graham Plattner messaging, because a lot of this anxiety with the working class. But this part about rigging the system, when you go in and gerrymander, folks see that and can understand that it's rigging the system. And it started with Donald Trump. Yes, California is following. Something interesting that nobody's talking about is there's a court case in El Paso right now. This Texas thing could get kicked out and at least pushed back 2 more years. And wouldn't that be something that California passed their maps, which is going to happen tomorrow, I predict. But then Texas has a 50-50 shot of not even having theirs.
And before we run out of time, Sarah, do you think tomorrow's results tell us much about the midterms for Republicans?
I do think these results tomorrow are going to tell us a lot. I think that if I had to read the tea leaves, I think you're going to see Prop 50 pass in California. I think you're going to see 2 Democrats win the gubernatorial races in Virginia and New Jersey. And that could be very telling of what's to come in the midterms.
Great way to tee us up for tomorrow. Thank you all. Appreciate your time, and thanks to our panel. And we know you'll be back here tomorrow for a special Election Day edition of Meet the Press Now. And as we've mentioned, we'll also have special election night coverage starting at 7 p.m. Eastern and as the results come in. So if you're as interested as we are, please join us right here tomorrow. There's more news ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.